Vora was 7 feet of armored scales and muscle. She came from a death world, and she believed she was the scariest thing in the galaxy. She looked at the small, soft human sitting at the bar and saw nothing but prey. She was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. She didn't know that while she was born on a dangerous world, the human was born in hell. The heavy metal doors of the rusty nebula bar slid open with a loud hiss, and the noise inside instantly died down. Just moments ago, the room had been filled with the sounds of strange music, clinking glasses, and the chatter of a dozen different alien species. But now, there was only silence. Every eye in the room turned toward the entrance. They all knew who was standing there. It was Vora. She paused in the doorway, letting the cool air of the space station hit her face. She took a deep breath, smelling the mixture of cheap fuel, alien sweat, and fear. It was a smell she loved. She was a Creel, and in this part of the galaxy, that meant she was royalty. Vora stepped into the room, and the floor vibrated slightly under her massive weight. She stood nearly 7 feet tall, covered in thick, dark green scales that looked like armor plates. Her tail, which was thick enough to smash a table in half, swished slowly behind her. She did not look at the other patrons. To her, they were nothing more than insects. She was from Kravos, a world known as a death world. On her planet, the gravity was twice as strong as standard planets. The wind could strip skin from bone, and the plants were poisonous. She had survived that hell, which made this space station feel like a playground for children. She believed she was the strongest thing alive. She began to walk toward the back of the bar. The crowd parted like water. No one dared to stand in her path. A group of 4-armed mercenaries, who usually acted tough, quickly looked down at their drinks as she passed. They knew the stories. They knew that a Creel could rip a metal door off its hinges with bare hands. Vora enjoyed their fear. It fed her ego. She walked with a slow, confident stride, making sure her heavy boots made a loud thud with every step. She wanted them to feel her presence. She wanted them to know that the apex predator had arrived to claim her territory. Her eyes locked onto her favorite spot, a large booth in the corner that offered a view of the whole room. However, there was a problem. Someone was already sitting there. It was a small, blue-skinned alien with large, watery eyes. He was nervously sipping a glowing yellow drink. Vora stopped a few feet away from the table. She didn't say a word. She simply let out a low, rumbling growl that sounded like rocks grinding together. The sound vibrated through the table and made the blue alien's drink ripple. The small creature looked up and froze. His skin turned a pale shade of gray. He didn't need to be told what to do. In a panic, the small alien scrambled out of the booth, knocking his drink over in the process. He didn't even bother to clean it up. He just ran toward the exit as fast as his little legs could carry him, terrified that the giant monster might decide to eat him for a snack. Vora let out a dry, rasping laugh. It was pathetic. These station dwellers were so soft, so weak. She slid into the booth, her massive frame taking up almost all the space. She wiped the spilled drink off the table with one swipe of her clawed hand. A shaking waiter robot rolled over to her table. Vora ordered a glass of pure ethanol mixed with sulfuric acid, a drink that would burn the throat of any other species, but to her, it tasted like water. She leaned back, crossing her powerful arms over her chest. She scanned the room, challenging anyone to meet her gaze. No one did. They all looked away, terrified. Vora smiled, showing rows of jagged, metal-like teeth. This was her world now. She was the queen of this station, the nightmare in the dark, the unmovable object. She truly believed that there was nothing in the entire universe that could challenge her dominance. She had no idea that the universe was about to prove her wrong. 30 minutes passed, and Vora was beginning to feel bored. The fear in the room had become stale. The other patrons were drinking quietly, keeping their voices low so they would not disturb the monster in the corner. Vora finished her acidic drink and tapped her claws against the metal table, creating a rhythmic, scratching sound that made the nearby aliens flinch. She was hoping for a fight, or at least a reason to break something, but everyone was too smart to challenge her. Then, the hydraulic hiss of the main door sounded again. Vora lazily shifted her eyes toward the entrance, expecting another rough mercenary or a heavy-world miner. Instead, she saw something that made her pause in confusion. The creature that walked in was small. It stood on two legs, but it looked incredibly fragile. It had no protective scales, no thick fur, and no visible armor. Its skin was a pale, pinkish color that looked so soft it might tear if it brushed against a sharp wall. It had a patch of hair on top of its head, but the rest of its body seemed exposed and vulnerable. It was a human. Vora had heard stories about them, mostly rumors from deep space traders, but she had never seen one in person. Looking at him now, she couldn't understand how his species had survived long enough to build spaceships. He looked like prey that had forgotten to hide. The human, a male named Jack, stepped into the bar with a strange calmness. He wore simple fabric clothes, a gray jacket and blue trousers, that offered zero protection against blasters or claws. He didn't carry a large weapon on his back, and he didn't scan the room for threats like a soldier would. He simply walked in as if he owned the place, or perhaps, as if he didn't care if he died. The silence in the bar deepened. The other aliens exchanged confused glances. They were used to seeing dangerous creatures in the rusty nebula, not soft, squishy things that looked like they belonged in a nursery. Jack walked past the tables of armed thugs without flinching. Vora watched him closely, her reptilian eyes narrowing. She expected him to scurry into a dark corner or look for a protector. Instead, he walked straight toward the bar counter, passing dangerously close to her booth. He didn't look at her. He didn't even acknowledge the massive, deadly creel sitting just 3 feet away. This annoyed Vora. In her mind, every creature on this station should be aware of her presence. To ignore her was an insult. She shifted her weight, making her armor plates click together loudly, a warning sound that usually sent people running. The human didn't even blink. He reached the bar and sat on a stool that looked too big for him. He leaned his elbows on the counter, exposing his soft neck. It was a fatal mistake in the wild, exposing the throat like that. Vora felt a surge of predatory instinct. She could snap his neck with 2 fingers. The robotic bartender rolled over to the human, its optical sensors whirring as it scanned the new customer. Jack asked for a whiskey, neat. His voice was low and raspy, sounding tired rather than afraid. The robot served a glass of brown liquid. The human picked it up with hands that had no claws, just flat, useless fingernails. Vora stared at his back, her anger growing. It wasn't just that he was small, it was his attitude. He sat with a relaxed slump, completely unbothered by the heavy atmosphere of the room. He acted as if the deadly radiation of space and the monsters in this bar were just boring details of his day. To Vora, who prided herself on being the scariest thing alive, this casual behavior was unacceptable. This soft, weak creature needed to learn his place in the food chain. She decided that she would be the one to teach him. She pushed her empty glass away and slowly stood up, her shadow stretching long across the floor toward the unsuspecting human. Vora moved away from her booth, and the entire atmosphere of the bar shifted from cautious silence to terrified anticipation. Every heavy step she took sent a vibration through the metal floor plates, a purposeful display of her immense mass and density. She walked slowly, savoring the moment. To the other patrons watching from the shadows, she looked like a walking tank, a creature built for war and destruction. The human, sitting with his back to her, seemed blissfully unaware of the doom approaching him. Vora stopped directly behind his stool. She stood so close that her massive shadow completely swallowed him. She loomed over him, at least 2 feet taller and 3 times wider, waiting for his survival instincts to kick in. She expected him to smell her predator scent, stiffen in panic, and beg for mercy. But the human did nothing. He simply lifted his glass to his lips and took another slow sip of his amber liquid. The disrespect was almost suffocating. Vora let out a low, menacing hiss that sounded like steam escaping a high-pressure pipe. She leaned down, bringing her large, scaled face just inches away from the human's ear. Her breath, hot and smelling of the chemical drink she had just finished, washed over him. She spoke in a voice that rumbled deep in her chest, demanding to know why a soft, skin-wrapped creature dared to ignore a creel. She told him that he was sitting in her personal space, a lie she invented just to start a conflict. She wanted him to turn around and see the monster. She wanted to see his eyes go wide when he realized that he was sitting next to a death machine. Finally, the human reacted. He didn't jump, and he didn't scream. He slowly placed his glass back on the counter with a gentle clink. He turned his head slightly to the side, not even fully facing her, and remarked that there were plenty of other places to stand. His voice was calm, almost bored, as if he were talking to a noisy fly rather than a giant alien warrior. This casual dismissal hit Vora harder than a physical punch. Her anger flared into a burning rage. She slammed her clawed hand onto the bar counter next to his arm. The metal of the counter dented under her strength, and the sound echoed like a gunshot through the room. The robot bartender quickly rolled to the far end of the bar, sensing imminent violence. Vora decided it was time to educate this ignorant tourist. She began to list the reasons why he should be terrified. She spoke of her home world, Kravos, a planet where the gravity crushed the weak and the storms dissolved flesh. She bragged about her biology, explaining that her bones were reinforced with natural carbon deposits, making them harder than iron. She flexed her claws, which were sharp enough to tear through spaceship hulls. She told him that she was the apex predator, the top of the food chain, and that he was nothing more than a soft bag of water and weak bones. She expected this speech to finally break him. She wanted him to understand that he was standing next to a force of nature. The human, Jack, finally swiveled his stool around to face her completely. For the first time, Vora saw his face clearly. He didn't look impressed. He didn't look horrified. He looked at her heavily armored body, her sharp teeth, and her dented metal bar, and he let out a short, tired sigh. He looked at her the way a parent looks at a toddler throwing a tantrum. He told her that she talked too much. It was the ultimate insult. Vora's vision went red with fury. All logic left her mind. She didn't care about the station rules anymore. She didn't care about the cleanup fee. She decided right then and there that she was going to crush this arrogant little creature into dust to prove to the galaxy that she was the strongest. She raised her fist, ready to strike. Vora roared, a sound so loud it vibrated the bottles behind the bar. She did not hold back. In her mind, the conversation was over, and it was time for violence. She swung her massive right arm in a wide, deadly arc. Her fist, which was the size of a human head and covered in rock-hard scales, aimed directly for Jack's temple. It was a blow designed to kill. On her home planet, she had used this same punch to crack the skulls of wild beasts. She put her entire body weight behind it, twisting her hips to generate maximum power. The air actually whistled as her clawed hand cut through it. The other patrons in the bar flinched and looked away, not wanting to see the soft human splatter across the wall. They waited for the sickening sound of breaking bones and the wet splash of defeat. Instead, a different sound echoed through the silent room. It was a heavy, dull thud, like a sledgehammer hitting a solid block of rubber. There was no scream, no flying body, and no blood. The bar went completely still. Slowly, the aliens who had looked away turned back to see what had happened. What they saw seemed physically impossible. Vora's fist had stopped abruptly in mid-air, just inches from the human's face. Jack had not dodged. He had not ducked under the table. He was still sitting on his stool, his posture relaxed. His left hand was raised effortlessly, and his open palm had caught Vora's massive fist. He had stopped the unstoppable force without even spilling the drink in his right hand. Vora blinked, her reptilian brain struggling to process reality. She looked at her fist, then at the small, pink hand holding it. It didn't make sense. Physics said this should not happen. She was 500 pounds of muscle and armor, he was a lightweight creature of soft skin. She grunted and tried to push her fist forward, engaging the powerful muscles in her shoulder and back to crush him. She pushed with enough force to bend a steel beam. But Jack's arm did not budge. It was as rigid as a mountain. He held her fist in place with a terrifying stability. For the first time, Vora noticed the density of his muscles under his jacket. They weren't big and bulky like hers, they were compact, like coiled steel cables. Panic began to rise in Vora's chest, a cold feeling she hadn't felt since she was a hatchling. She tried to pull her hand back, wanting to retreat and reassess the situation. But she couldn't. Jack's fingers had curled around her armored knuckles. His grip was absolute. It felt less like a hand and more like a hydraulic clamp used for starship repairs. She tugged harder, her boots sliding and screeching against the metal floor, but the human remained anchored to his stool. He was grounded by a center of gravity and a skeletal density that defied her understanding. She realized then that she had made a terrible calculation error. She had judged him by his size, not his composition. Jack finally looked up from his drink. His eyes met hers, and the boredom was gone. In its place was a cold, predatory focus that sent shivers down Vora's spine. He didn't look like a prey animal anymore. He looked like something ancient and dangerous. Slowly, deliberately, Jack began to squeeze. Vora's eyes widened in shock. Her scales were supposed to be impenetrable, harder than iron. But under the pressure of the human's grip, she felt her natural armor begin to buckle. A sharp, grinding pain shot up her arm. She gasped, her knees buckling slightly under the agony. The human wasn't just strong, he was damaging her indestructible body with his bare hands. The soft stranger was crushing her hardest bones, and he wasn't even breathing hard. Vora let out a humiliating noise, a high-pitched whimper that sounded nothing like an apex predator. The pressure on her hand became unbearable. With a sickening crunch, the thick scales on her knuckles cracked like dry clay. Jack finally stood up from his stool. He moved slowly, unfolding his body with a terrifying grace. Even though he was much shorter than Vora, he seemed to loom over her. He twisted her arm behind her back with a simple, fluid motion, forcing the giant alien down onto her knees. The floor shook as her heavy knees hit the metal plates. Now, the small human was looking down at her. The entire dynamic of the room had flipped in seconds. The monster was on the floor, and the prey was standing tall. Jack leaned in close, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than any shout in the silent bar. He began to explain the physics of their situation. He told her that he could feel how light she was. He explained that on her world, gravity might be strong compared to space, but compared to Earth, her world was weak. He told her that on Earth, gravity was a constant, crushing force that pulled everything down with punishing weight. Because of this, human bones had evolved to be dense and compact, not hollow or brittle like hers. He explained that to him, moving on this space station felt like swimming in air. He didn't need scales or armor because his entire skeletal structure was built to withstand a planet that tried to crush him every single day. Vora struggled to breathe, her mind spinning. She had always believed her biology was superior. She thought her Deathworld status made her invincible. But as she looked at the veins standing out on Jack's forearm, she realized the truth. He was a product of a much harsher environment. Jack continued his lecture, his tone cold and factual. He pointed out her poison resistance. He reminded her of the drink he was holding. He explained that humans regularly consumed toxins for fun. They drank ethanol to relax, ate plants that burned their tongues for flavor, and inhaled smoke. What Vora considered a lethal chemical weapon, humans considered a Friday night beverage. Her biological advantages were nothing more than party tricks to him. The realization hit Vora harder than the physical pain. She wasn't fighting a weakling, she was fighting a creature that had evolved in a biological hell. Jack tightened his grip slightly, just to emphasize his point. He told her that she was a Deathworlder, in name only. She was a tourist who had survived a rough neighborhood. He, on the other hand, was a survivor of a planetary war against nature itself. He described Earth as a chaotic world of shifting tectonic plates, massive storms, apex predators, and diseases, all trapped under crushing gravity. Humans didn't just survive there, they conquered it. They were the monsters who had killed all the other monsters on their planet. Vora stopped fighting. Her tail lay limp on the floor. The pride that had defined her entire life evaporated. She looked up at the human with wide, terrified eyes. She finally understood why he hadn't been afraid. He wasn't ignoring her out of ignorance, he was ignoring her because she wasn't a threat. To a human, she was just a large, fragile balloon. Jack saw the defeat in her eyes. He saw that she finally understood her place in the galaxy. He wasn't the prey. He was the one thing the galaxy should truly fear, a bored human who just wanted to finish his drink. He had shattered her worldview without even breaking a sweat. The crushing pressure on Vora's wrist suddenly vanished. Jack didn't throw her across the room or kick her while she was down. He simply opened his hand and let her go, as if he were dropping a piece of trash that was no longer interesting. Vora scrambled backward on the floor, her boots sliding clumsily on the metal plates. She cradled her throbbing, fractured hand against her chest, letting out short, panicked breaths. The pain was sharp, but the humiliation was agonizing. For her entire life, she had believed she was the protagonist of the galaxy, the hunter who feared nothing. Now, sitting in the dirt before this small, soft creature, she felt like a child who had foolishly poked a sleeping dragon. She looked up at him one last time, searching for any sign of mercy or anger, but she found neither. Jack turned his back on her without a second thought. He adjusted his jacket, smoothing out the wrinkles caused by the brief scuffle. He sat back down on his stool, the metal creaking slightly as he settled in. He picked up his glass of whiskey, which miraculously hadn't spilled a drop during the confrontation, and downed the rest of it in one gulp. He placed the empty glass on the counter with a loud tap and looked at the trembling robot bartender. "Another one," Jack said calmly. "And make it a double this time. I had a long day." The robot, usually slow and glitchy, moved with record-breaking speed to pour the drink. It seemed terrified that if it didn't serve the human fast enough, it might be crushed into scrap metal. Vora knew she couldn't stay. Her reputation in the Rusty Nebula was destroyed forever. She struggled to her feet, flinching as her bruised knees took her weight. She didn't growl, she didn't threaten anyone, and she certainly didn't look like a queen anymore. She kept her head down, avoiding eye contact with the mercenaries and thieves she had terrified just minutes ago. She limped toward the exit, her tail dragging sadly on the floor behind her. As the heavy doors hissed open, she stepped out into the corridor, disappearing into the station's shadows. She had come in as a conqueror, but she left as a survivor, grateful just to be alive. Inside the bar, a heavy silence hung in the air for a long time. No one moved. The four-armed mercenaries were staring at the back of Jack's head with wide, fearful eyes. The blue alien who had run away earlier peeked out from behind a crate. They all realized that their understanding of the universe had just changed. They had always thought that size and armor meant power. They thought that sharp teeth and claws were the signs of a killer. But looking at the small, unassuming human calmly drinking his poison, they learned a new lesson. The most dangerous things in the galaxy didn't need to roar. They didn't need to show off. They just needed to be left alone. Slowly, the noise of the bar began to return, but it was different now. The conversations were whispers. Eyes kept darting toward the lone figure at the bar. No one dared to sit near him. A wide circle of empty space remained around Jack, a physical boundary of respect and fear. He was no longer just a soft-skinned traveler or a potential victim. To everyone on that station, he was the new apex predator. The hierarchy had shifted. The Deathworlders might be scary, but the humans were the nightmare that the Deathworlders told stories about in the dark. Jack finished his second drink, sighed contentedly, and signaled for the check, completely unaware, or perhaps completely uncaring, that he had just become a legend.